how is that for a fine how do you do? Welcome to VG Emporium, video game music and more, with an exclamation point, podcast. If you're a returning customer, you know what I deal in, but if you're new here, well, you know I play mostly video game music, remixes of video game music, as well as music inspired by video game music. So that would be like, original music that has that sound, or original chiptunes, which actually what is today's focus will be. Again. Yep, this is the Sega Genesis Mega Drive chiptune scene of the 2010s, Model 2. Because, the Sega Genesis had 3 different models. Yeah? Huh. So now if you're kind of confused as to how I'm on Model 2, well, on episode 25 of VG Emporium, I did a focus on 5 different artists that were major parts of this scene, as well as the creator of the program Vgm Music Maker that helped kind of kickstart that scene. And I was in a small way involved with that scene, as well as the other chiptunes I'm going to be featuring today. It's not going to be as intensive as Model 1, which is I'm going to call it now, but, it's going to still be fun. So a brief overview. So before the 2010s, there wasn't really much, many people making Sega Genesis Mega Drive chiptunes. Mostly it would be through MML, music macro language, or kind of cheesing it with VSTs and samples of the sounds from the Sega Genesis and stuff. And then it wasn't until 2011 that a fellow by the name of Shiru created a program called Vgm Music Maker, which actually this track that you're hearing now is made with. And it emulated the sound chips of the Sega Genesis, so the YM2612 and the SN76489 PSG. And so that was found by 3 guys, Cosmo BG, Dread, and Groovemaster 303. They created an album called FM Possible, released that, and that just opened the floodgates because, people that were enthusiastic about chiptunes found it, listened to it, and found the Vgm Music Maker link, and just started making their own music, I myself included. And of course, throughout 2010, there'd be other programs released that'd be used to make the, Sega Genesis Mega Drive chiptunes. So one would be Deflamask, Multi-Chip Tracker, the version released in 2015, which had the full functionality of those chips, and then a couple VSTs, one being Jenny, and the other one being FM Drive 2612. And I'll be getting into those a little bit later in the show after I, play some tracks. So first, let me tell you about this track here. This is Messman Theme by yours truly, Rage Cage. And this is the second track that I ever made with Vgm Music Maker. And, I can't quite explain, how this one happened. I was just sitting at my local cafe called Cosmic Cafe, and I was just, just working on it, and it just kind of, flowed out of me. It was weird. It was I was just starting to get to grips with how to make music with trackers, and, so I can't really explain this one. As far as the composition side of things, I had just come off being attending a place called SAE Institute of Technology, taking an electronic music production course, where I had learned some basics of composition alongside how to use programs like Ableton, Pro Tools, and all that stuff that comes along with that. Whereas before I was just going willy-nilly with Reason and just making stuff and not keeping with key or anything like that. After SAE, it in a way kind of ruined me because I found it harder to create music because I was so focused on the production side of things, actually making it sound good and keeping things in key, and I was just overwhelmed with it. And then I found this Vgm Music Maker, and it just kind of freed me because I didn't have to worry about production. I didn't have to worry about EQing or compression or mixing, or at least not too much of mixing. And then as far as the composition, I took the stuff that I learned from keeping things in key, which I was still learning, and you get this. And another thing that kind of locked me up was all these VSTs. Which one am I going to use? How am I going to use it? Where am I going to use it? What the? But then with this program, all you have is the 4-op FM synth, and then, the PSG. And so all you have to worry about is just creating the patches. And, VGM Music Maker would have these initial patches that, sounded okay, and then you could just build off of that. And I just kind of twisted the knobs and moved a bunch of stuff around and came up with all these sounds that you're hearing right now. And then, fun fact, for the samples, I used the drum samples from Chrono Trigger, which a lot of my early songs used because they're just so good and punchy. So now I'm still making chiptunes, not just of the FM variety, but also of the PC Engine, NES, Commodore 64, you name it, because I am using currently Deflamask on my iPhone. And I've kind of gotten so used to that interface, I'm having a hard time getting back to using the desktop or laptop to try out Furnace Tracker, which is got even more options of sound chips to use. But yeah, if you want to check my stuff out, I'm on SoundCloud, Rage Cage. And then on Twitter, I occasionally share the stuff I'm making. So it's a fun time. So now we're going to move on to our next Mega Drive chiptunist. And her name is Circuit Bird. And the track is called Boss Theme from a fake game OST, Psychosis. That was Boss Theme from the fake OST for Psychosis by Circuit Bird. And I gotta say, I really like that PSG work in this track and the FM tone drums. I might say that this track is inspired by Thunder Force. Maybe. And she was one of those that got caught up in that tidal wave that was the FM Possible. And because I remember checking out her earlier SoundCloud stuff, and it was all made using the Korg MO1D, and they were all remixes and covers. And then at one point, starts becoming Sega Genesis music. And then, main way I found her was through a collaboration she did with Dread. And, that was really good. So, that's how I found her. And yeah, what Sega Genesis chiptune she has done is really, really good. But now she's currently more focusing on electronica, still doing covers and all, but using the Korg gadget. Yeah, so all her stuff is definitely worth a check out. And I will be linking hers as well as everybody else's SoundClouds or Bandcamps or whatever they post their music mainly on the show notes, so you go listen to the rest of their music. Now we're going to move on to quite possibly one of my favorites of this whole scene, Rob2612 with his track, Done With You. was Done With You by Rob2612, or also known as Rabugga at the time. And his name may sound familiar because he was actually part of that crazy 8-man collaboration that was 8 Ball that was featured on the episode 25 of VG Emporium. And of all the folks that got involved with the 2010 scene, I'd probably say he is one of my favorites because just his style is just so, I don't know, I just can't quite pinpoint it. And I will go so far as to say this is one of my favorites of the batch that I'm going to be playing today too, because I don't know, it's just this one just keeps popping in my head every once in a while. I'll just be doodling that lead. It's just so good and addictive. And, he's another one of those that got caught up in that wave and, did some collaborations with Dread and all, and, found his own style, this really just like big, funky, brassy style. And unfortunately, he stopped making music back in 2012. I don't know if he changed his name or whatnot, but the last track I could find on SoundCloud was from 2016. But what he did make is just all so good. So now we're gonna do a complete 180 with the next track I have for you, called Facade by MB Tech. That was Facade by MB Tech. And like I said, this one is a complete 180 from what Rob2612's track was. It's more of an experimental electronic sound, and a lot of the tones that he used in this could be coming from an ad-lib tracker, for the way how they sound. But he has the added bonus of having 2 extra operators, so the sounds that he's able to get are a lot more complex. Whereas ad-lib is 2, Sega Genesis or the YM2612 is 4. But yeah, these bass tones are just really deep, grungy, and I really like that, kind of like that wow. Just like that. And I'm kind of looking it up right now, but this could fall under the subgenre of dubstep that is called post-dubstep. But of course, myself, I am not that versed in dubstepology, so I have no idea what I'm talking about. But yeah, MB Tech, another one featured in that 8-Ball track. And yeah, his style is definitely a lot more kind of like on the darker sound of the YM2612, like kind of going for like the more grungier sounds, kind of slower, experimental. He does get funky. You know, that's what the YM2612 like excels at, is just making those funky sounds. But yeah, he kind of more goes for like the nitty gritty. Now again, I'm just going off of SoundCloud, but it looks like the last thing he made was back in 2020, and those last couple things were not, you know, Sega Genesis, Mega Drive, chiptune-ish, but you know, still really good, like nice electronic music. So now moving right along, up next we have Salazar, the S spelt with a 5, and his track, I Need to Chill. That was I Need to Chill by Salazar, and this was made using Deflamask, fresh out of the gates, with after adding its newest feature of the YM2612 and the SN76489 modules. And everything about this track just sounds so nice, like that little melody kind of sound effect in the background. That's a patch using the SSG, which is basically a modulation for the ADSR, you know, volume controls and everything, and so it kind of gives it like that kind of like kind of like nice little warbly effect. That flute lead is just so clean, and the bass is just really nice and deep. You know, Salazar really knew what he was doing, and surprisingly, he only has a few tracks, and the first one that he had come out with was a cover of the field theme from Gargoyle's Quest on the Game Boy, which is, you know, first one I heard of his, and like, you know, I really like that because Gargoyle's Quest was one of my favorite games on the Game Boy. And then after that, he did like a few other covers, and then this one, and then nothing else. But he definitely left quite an impact because like in the conversation I was having between Dread and Dia and Cosmo BG, one of the names that came up like to mention in like it's an episode like this was Salazar, because just the stuff that he did was just sounded so good for, like, you know, just showing up out of nowhere and then just kind of disappearing. So yeah, really taking advantage of the full functionality that the Deflamask had offered, because before, you know, Vgm Music Maker, it was good, it was really good, but it still had some bugs and some, you know, functionalities that weren't there. And then Deflamask comes out and it's, you know, more fully realized in 2015 with its, you know, YM2612 functionalities, and you know, so people started to migrate to Deflamask. Some stayed with VGM Music Maker, such as myself and Dread, and you know, they're both really good in their own rights. You know, they could do, you know, one could do one thing that the other couldn't. So, you know, it's like, you know, it's either or. It's not like one is better than the other, at least in my eyes. I'll always have a soft spot for Vgm Music Maker. But speaking of which, we're going to head back to something that was made with it by a fellow by the name of EC2151 with his track, Hope in the Darkness. That magnificent piece was Hope in the Darkness by EC2151, and he made it and released it for his 10,000 plus listener special. Because, that's kind of crazy to me because, that amount of people listening to all his music combined, but hey, they deserved it because, their music is just really good. And is thankfully one of the few that leaves very detailed descriptions on their tracks on SoundCloud, so I can kind of tell you a little bit about this guy. So much like Dread and Cosmo BG, he started using TFM Music Maker, which was the program that preceded VGM Music Maker, to create his Sega Genesis tracks, only could using the FM. And so his patchwork here is kind of something akin to what you would again hear from Adlib Tracker. So yeah, while everything was going on with Dread, Cosmo, Groovemaster 33, and all the others, he was just kind of doing his own thing, just making, kept making music using TFM Music Maker, VGM Music Maker. So now I remember in the description of this track, which came out about 2015, 2016, he was eagerly awaiting the YM2151 sound chip addition to Deflamask because, as his name would suggest, he's very much into the YM2151, which is 8 channels of FM, which were primarily used in arcade boards and the Sharp X68000. And then when it did finally come out, immediately started seeing little demos and previews of a OST he was working on for a little game called Demon's Tilt, which is, if you don't know, is very much a spiritual successor to a game called Devil's Crush, which was basically a pinball video game, and it was done very well, just the visuals, the way how it flowed and worked and everything. So these guys wanted to recreate that with newer graphics and all this stuff, and he was creating the soundtrack with the YM2151, giving it that really hardcore kind of arcade sound. And boy howdy, do I tell you, that is a good OST, so go give it a listen. And I'll of course be linking his SoundCloud and Bandcamp where you can find it, and just let those FM tones just get into your ears and affect your brain. But we are not here to talk of chiptunes of the arcade variety. We're here to talk about chiptunes of the Sega Genesis Mega Drive variety. So moving right on. The next track I got for you is actually made in a standard DAW, so think, FL Studios or Ableton, using a VST called FM Drive VST and Super PSG by Ali James, and the track is called FM Mecha YM2612. That was FM Mecha YM2612 by Ali James, made using the VSTs developed by Ali James called FM Drive and Super PSG. And as I had mentioned earlier, there was a couple of VSTs that people used to make Sega Genesis music, so one being Jenny, which is a free-to-use, simple, pretty much does most what all the other trackers do as far as sound goes, but then FM Drive and Super PSG, which were developed by Ali James. And these VSTs are powerhouses to where they actually take what the chips are capable of and pushing them over their limits using software. So because the hardware limitations there. But so in the case of the Super PSG, it allowed for doing these crazy phasing effects and all this stuff that you really normally wouldn't even hear in any of the games at all. And then the FM Drive itself, towards the end, you heard this really cool sound. It was kind of almost like a formant sound. That's called the CSM mode. And that is actually a feature that is within the YM2612. It just never got used because it's really hard to use in hardware or something. But using software, you could actually get it and use it. And if you really know what you're doing with it, you could actually do speech synthesis with it. And to actually hear how it sounds, Ali James has uploaded a few videos on YouTube, actually showing how it works. I haven't actually heard it in any songs used, but maybe I'm just not, looking in the right places. So yeah, listen up. If you're interested in making Sega Genesis music, but don't really know how to use trackers or don't really want to use a tracker and you're used to a DAW, a digital audio workstation, give this a look up. I'll be linking his website and you can actually purchase these VSTs to use. And then, I'll also be linking Jenny as well, just so if you want to get an idea of how to work with the YM2612 before actually going full into this powerful piece of software. He's also developed other VSTs, such as the VPROM, which is a EEPROM vintage drum computer, OB Extreme, which emulates the Oberheim OBX vintage synthesizer, and is currently working on Samplite, which is a VST that's going to basically emulate the entirety of the Fairlight CMI, which was a digital workstation that did sampling, synthesizing, and was like a full-on computer workstation. And it was entirely dedicated to just music creation, and it was most famously used by Herbie Hancock, Stevie Wonder, Peter Gabriel, and Kate Bush, and her album, Never Forever, was the first commercial album to use this, piece of hardware. But again, we're stepping away from the YM2612. We gotta pull ourselves back, and I know just how to do that. And that is Lunar Light Zone, Past, by MarkBot. Just heard Lunar Light Zone Past by MarkBot, and thankfully they're another one that likes to leave detailed descriptions on their tracks. So this track was made for a project called Sonic CD2, which was a collaboration between MarkBot, Layla Wilson-Wolfel, and Raphael Goulart, both really awesome musicians as well. And basically, it's just a project where they're creating a soundtrack for a non-existent Sonic CD2. For these three have very much a shared love of Sonic's music. Now this is getting me thinking of doing another subject about OSTs for games that don't exist. That'd be a fun one. So now the rest of MarkBot's music, at least on SoundCloud, are all chiptune covers or original music that is non-chiptune. I would imagine a lot of these folks have stuff on Battle of the Bits or other chiptune sites, but I'm just focusing on the ones that I remember hearing on SoundCloud during the 2010s because that's where I was, seeing most of this music. Yeah, so we're getting pretty close to the end here. I got a couple more tracks to play for you, and they are most definitely not the least. So up next I got for you, Beneath the Ice by The Dead. That was Beneath the Ice by The Dead. And this here track won him first place in Winter Chip 12. In his description, it goes on to say that all the patches that are heard in this track are all made from scratch. Like no borrowing patches from any like games or from anybody else, just his own from the initial basic patch, and he just built them up. And what he's made here is just really awesome. Again, kind of going to those realms of dubstep that MP Tech was kind of doing, but double plus even more than that. I don't know how to explain it, but it's just, I just love the sound of the percussion that he's got going on. The bass is just all over the place. And this is kind of what he does. I mean, so he, Dia, and Game Genie Sokolov all kind of started around the same time using Deflamask. And they all, kind of emphasize, 3 different things. So, whereas Dia was really into, making really cool sounding kind of demo scene stuff, Game Genie Sokolov is, more synthwave, melodic, really awesome. The Dead was more into the technical, really pushing what the chip can do as far as creating these crazy just sounds. And speaking of awesome sounds, I got this last track here for you. This is Piece of Cake by Tony Lees from his album Blast Processed. that was Piece of Cake by Tony Lees from his album Blast Processed. And not only does it feature his original music, but it also features remixes of this music by Dread and Swordmurd. And he's another one of those guys that grew up loving the Sega Genesis and the sound of it, and then eventually wanted to create music with it, and started doing so, and learned a lot of things from Dread as well, because he's been in a few collaborations. He actually showed up on that 8-Ball collaboration, and then he's done more and more, and just like kept on improving and building, and now he's like mostly doing a lot of non Sega Genesis chiptune stuff. I think he goes back to it every once in a while. It's been a bit since I've gone back to listen to his stuff, but it was really cool to kind of just watch his evolution. Just a really awesome musician, and none of his stuff disappoints. And actually, a cool memory is that I remember he was hyping up this album when he was like working on it, like kind of sharing previews on SoundCloud and everything, and I was getting pretty pumped because it was like an album that was purely Sega Genesis chiptunes. So what could be cooler than that? And so this brings us to a close. I feel kind of bad that I wasn't able to go as in-depth on these as I did on the first Mega Drive Genesis chiptune episode. I didn't really give myself much prep. I just kind of went through my memory banks, remembered which, the names of the folks I was, heard throughout that decade, and, went and listened to them, pulled out my favorite tracks of each of these folks, and yeah, here you go. I'm possibly considering doing a Model 3, covering the collaborations, because, again, that was a big part of this whole chiptune scene, was just everybody collaborating with each other and creating just, taking their individual awesome styles and then creating even just, more amazing musics. So I'd like to thank you for coming into VG Emporium. You can find VG Emporium on, all the social medias, like Twitter and Instagram, as well as on all your favorite podcatchers, like, Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, and Audacity? Not Audacity. Audible. And I'm currently working on uploading all the episodes to YouTube right now, so hopefully eventually I'll be having all of them up there and be updating it as I release episodes. So I've been your host, Rage Cage, and you can find me on all those same social medias, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, as well as you listen to my original Sega Genesis chiptune music, which doesn't even hold a candle against all the stuff I just showed you today. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this, and see you next week.